You sit after prayer and still feel the same insecurity. You recite Allah's name and the anxiety returns. You finish your salah and somehow the burden follows you back out. Not because you skipped the prayer, not because you rushed through it, not because your faith disappeared, but because something inside you remained crowded. The anxiety was still there. The comparison was still there. The conversation that bothered you this morning was still replaying itself. The insecurity returned before you even folded your prayer mat. You washed your face. You washed your hands. You stood before Allah. And yet somehow the burden followed you back out. Most people assume this means they need stronger iman, more discipline, more knowledge, more worship. But Ibn Arabi points us towards something much deeper. He says the problem is not always that your worship is weak. Sometimes the problem is that your heart arrived carrying things it was never meant to carry. Think about your day, the images, the opinions, the worries, the ambitions, the disappointments, the endless stream of impressions entering your heart from every direction. What if those impressions do not simply disappear? What if they accumulate? What if one of the greatest secrets hidden inside wudu is that Allah never intended you to carry all of that into His presence? Ibn Arabi saw something in wudu that most people never notice. He believed purification was not merely about removing dirt. It was about restoring the heart's ability to receive divine realities. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Allah made wudu a repeated act throughout the day. What Ibn Arabi believed it was actually doing to your soul, and how your next wudu can completely transform the way you experience prayer. In this video, we are going to look at 6 very specific things. First, why sincere Muslims can pray regularly and still feel spiritually exhausted. Then, we will examine the hidden contamination Ibn Arabi says gathers on the heart long before sins appear in actions. After that, we will discover why every limb washed during wudu corresponds to an inner faculty of the soul. Then we will uncover why Allah made wudu repetitive instead of occasional. We will explore the deeper secret of why water was chosen as the means of purification. And finally, we will learn practical ways to turn your next wudu into a complete renewal of your spirit. Because once you see what Ibn Arabi saw, you may never make wudu the same way again. The modern Muslim lives inside an environment that previous generations could barely imagine. Your attention is being competed for every minute. A notification appears. A message arrives. A headline creates anxiety. A social media post creates comparison. An argument leaves anger behind. A success story leaves envy behind. A failure leaves discouragement behind. And the strange thing is that most people assume these experiences simply disappear. They don't. Not psychologically, not spiritually. This is where Ibn Arabi becomes incredibly relevant. When people hear his name, they often think of poetry, mysticism, or abstract philosophy. But Ibn Arabi was much more than that. He was a scholar of Quran, a scholar of Hadith, a jurist, a metaphysician, and perhaps most importantly for our discussion today, a profound observer of the human soul. Throughout the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, Ibn Arabi repeatedly describes the heart as a place of reception. The heart receives impressions, it receives meanings, it receives influences, it receives forms. Everything you encounter leaves traces. Some traces bring clarity, others create distortion. Some polish the mirror, others cover it. And this leads us to one of the most important ideas in this entire video. The problem is not merely sin. The problem is accumulation. Modern psychology has a term that points towards something similar. Researchers speak about attentional fatigue. The mind becomes overloaded through constant stimulation. Focus decreases. Clarity decreases. Emotional regulation decreases. You feel tired without knowing why. Ibn Arabi described a spiritual version of the same phenomenon nearly 800 years ago. The heart becomes crowded, the soul becomes burdened, the mirror becomes covered. Science describes what is happening. Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it. And this is why our discussion today is different from most conversations about wudu. Most content explains how to perform it correctly. That is essential. But today we are asking a different question. Why did Allah make it repetitive? Why not once a day? Why not once a week? Why place this act throughout the rhythm of daily life? Ibn Arabi's answer is astonishing. Because the heart is constantly receiving. Therefore it must be constantly renewed. Think of Ahmad, 29 years old. Works in finance. Prays all 5 prayers. Never misses Jumu'ah. People would describe him as responsible and disciplined. One afternoon he opens LinkedIn during his lunch break. A former classmate announces a promotion. Another shares photos from an expensive vacation. Someone else posts about launching a successful business. He scrolls for 40 minutes. Then he closes the app. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody insulted him. Nobody harmed him. He didn't commit a major sin. Yet something has changed. A subtle heaviness appears. A quiet comparison begins. A question enters his mind. Why am I behind? By Maghrib, that feeling remains. He makes wudu. He stands for prayer. He recites Surah Al-Fatiha. But part of his attention is still living inside those posts. Part of his heart never left LinkedIn. This is exactly what Ibn Arabi is describing. In the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, Ibn Arabi presents the heart as a receiver of forms and impressions. The world enters you, not physically. Spiritually, every encounter leaves traces. Every image leaves traces. Every conversation leaves traces. Every ambition leaves traces. Most people imagine spiritual pollution only in terms of obvious sins. Ibn Arabi's framework is more subtle. Sometimes what clouds the heart is not a forbidden thing. Sometimes it is an excessive attachment to a permissible thing. That distinction changes everything. Because now you begin looking at your life differently. The issue is no longer simply asking, what sins did I commit today? The deeper question becomes, what occupied my heart today? That is a very different examination, and it is often a more uncomfortable one. Imagine a camera lens. Nothing is wrong with the camera itself. The lens is intact, the equipment functions perfectly. But fingerprints accumulate, dust accumulates, smudges accumulate. The image becomes less clear, not because the camera lost its ability to see, but because something gathered upon it. Ibn Arabi uses the language of the heart. The Prophet used the language of rust upon the heart. The image is remarkably similar. The heart still possesses its capacity, but something has gathered over it. Have you noticed this in your own life? You wake up feeling clear. Then the day begins. An argument, a news story, a comparison, a disappointment, a temptation, a worry. By evening you feel spiritually exhausted. Yet if someone asked what happened, you would struggle to explain it. Nothing major occurred. The exhaustion came from accumulation. Modern psychology calls this attentional residue. Researchers have found that attention often remains partially attached to previous experiences, even after we move to something new. Part of the mind stays behind. Ibn Arabi described something similar through the language of impressions upon the heart. Science describes what is happening. Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it. This is why wudu matters. Not because water magically erases thoughts, not because a few drops automatically remove anxiety, but because wudu interrupts momentum. It creates a threshold, a transition, a conscious movement away from accumulated impressions and toward Allah. When you wash your hands, your face, your arms, you are being invited to release what the day has attached to you, not merely physically, spiritually. But here is what most people miss. The greatest threat to clarity is not always sinful impressions. Sometimes it is lawful distraction. Sometimes it is ambition. Sometimes it is status. Sometimes it is the endless mental noise generated by things that are technically permissible. The heart does not become crowded only through haram. It becomes crowded through excess. And suddenly wudu begins to look different. You are no longer washing dirt from your skin. You are interrupting accumulation. You are creating space. You are clearing the lens. You are preparing the heart to receive. The soul is exhausted less by sin than by accumulation. But if impressions gather upon the heart, there is one place they gather more aggressively than anywhere else. And that place is the very thing most people spend their lives protecting. Think of Sarah, 24 years old, practicing Muslim, successful university student. She posts a photograph online before Isha, nothing inappropriate, nothing sinful, a normal picture. Then something interesting happens. She checks the reactions. 5 minutes later she checks again. 20 minutes later she checks again. Before sleeping she checks again. The photograph occupies far more attention than the photograph deserves. Why? Because it is no longer about the photograph. It is about identity. It is about how she appears. It is about how she is seen. And most importantly, it is about how she imagines other people are seeing her. This is exactly where Ibn Arabi takes us next. In Fusus al-Hikam, particularly in his discussion of Adam, Ibn Arabi repeatedly returns to the language of reflection and mirrors. Human beings live among forms. They become fascinated by forms. They become attached to forms. Eventually they begin confusing forms with reality. And nowhere is this more visible than in the face. The face is how we present ourselves. The face is how people recognize us. The face becomes the symbol of identity itself. This is why washing the face carries extraordinary spiritual meaning. Not because the skin is uniquely dirty, but because the self-image attached to it often is. Ask yourself honestly, how much energy do you spend managing impressions? How much energy goes into being perceived correctly? Being admired, being respected, being seen as intelligent, being seen as spiritual, being seen as successful. Even religious people fall into this trap. Sometimes especially religious people. Because the nafs is adaptable. The ego rarely disappears. It changes costumes. The same self that once wanted worldly admiration now wants spiritual admiration. The same self that wanted status now wants piety status. The costume changed, the desire remained. Have you noticed this? You perform a good deed, then secretly hope somebody notices. You share beneficial knowledge, then wonder how people responded. You help someone, then feel disappointed when recognition never comes. The nafs has simply changed its clothing. Ibn Arabi spent enormous effort exposing these hidden attachments, not to create guilt, but to create freedom. Modern psychology calls part of this process self-objectification. A person begins viewing themselves through the imagined gaze of others. Instead of simply existing, they perform. Instead of living, they curate. Instead of worshipping, they sometimes begin managing an image of worship. Researchers have found that excessive self-monitoring increases anxiety and weakens authentic engagement. Ibn Arabi identified the same disease through a spiritual lens centuries earlier. Science describes what is happening. Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it. And this is where wudu becomes astonishing. Every time water touches your face, you are being invited into a question. Who are you when nobody is watching? Not your followers, not your family, not your community, not even your religious circle. Who are you before Allah? Because Allah does not need your image. Allah already knows reality. The image only exists for other people. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Many people wash their face physically while carrying an entire false identity spiritually. The face becomes clean. The performance remains. The appearance becomes purified. The attachment survives. And that is why the ritual must go deeper. The water is not merely touching skin, it is challenging an illusion. The illusion that your value comes from how you are perceived. The illusion that your worth depends upon visibility. The illusion that your identity depends upon approval. When those illusions begin dissolving, something remarkable happens. Prayer changes. You stop performing before Allah. You begin standing before Allah, and those are not the same thing. The face Allah wants purified is not skin. It is self-image. Think of Khalid, 38 years old, married, 3 children, successful business owner, known in his community as hard-working and dependable. He sits at the dinner table with his family. His youngest daughter is trying to tell him a story. His wife is asking about his day. His son is laughing about something that happened at school. But Khalid barely hears any of it. Every few minutes his hand reaches for his phone. A message, an email, a sales notification, a client request, another message, and another, and another. If you asked him why he keeps checking, he would give a reasonable answer. He is responsible, he is providing, he is managing obligations. All of that is true. But Ibn Arabi would ask a different question. Not what is your hand reaching toward, what is your heart already attached to? Because according to Ibn Arabi, actions do not begin in the limbs. They begin in orientation. In the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he repeatedly treats the human faculties as expressions of deeper realities within the soul. The limbs are not independent actors. They reveal hidden directions. The hand moves because something inside has already leaned, and that changes the way we think about impurity. Most people imagine impurity as the result of a bad action. Ibn Arabi takes us deeper. The action is often the final stage. The attachment came first. The inclination came first. The hidden dependence came first. Imagine a compass. A compass naturally points north. That is its design. That is its nature. But place a powerful magnet nearby, and suddenly the needle shifts. The compass itself is not broken. Its orientation has been influenced. This is what attachment does. And this is why so many sincere Muslims feel spiritually divided. Part of them wants Allah. Part of them wants recognition. Part of them wants security. Part of them wants control. Part of them wants outcomes. Part of them wants certainty. The heart becomes pulled in multiple directions at once. Have you felt this? You tell yourself you are trusting Allah, yet you check for updates every 5 minutes. You tell yourself your provision comes from Allah, yet your emotional state rises and falls with numbers on a screen. You tell yourself your worth comes from Allah, yet one compliment changes your entire mood. One criticism ruins your evening. The hand keeps reaching, but the hand is only revealing what the heart already loves. This is the part most Islamic content never reaches. The issue is not merely what you do. The issue is what possesses your attention before you do it. Modern psychology calls part of this reward anticipation. Researchers have found that much of human behavior is driven not by rewards themselves, but by the expectation of rewards. The anticipation becomes addictive. The possibility becomes addictive. The next notification, the next message, the next sale, the next approval. Ibn Arabi described the spiritual dimension of this long before neuroscience existed. The heart becomes attached to means and forgets the one behind the means. Science describes what is happening. Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it. And suddenly washing the hands looks different. You are not merely cleaning instruments of action. You are examining instruments of pursuit. Every time water runs over your hands, you are being invited to ask, what am I constantly reaching for? What outcome owns my attention? What fear is directing my movement? What desire keeps pulling me away from presence? Because the deepest impurities often arrive disguised as necessities. The attachment does not announce itself. It hides inside responsibility. It hides inside ambition. It hides inside achievement. It hides inside perfectly reasonable goals. And that is why wudu becomes an act of honesty, not self-condemnation. Honesty. You stand before Allah and acknowledge, my hands are not the problem. My attachments are. My actions are not the beginning, my orientation is. And once that becomes visible, something starts to loosen. The magnet loses strength. The compass begins returning to its natural direction. Long before your hand reaches, your heart has already moved. Think of Yusuf, 43 years old, father of 3. The last 2 years have been difficult. Rising expenses, unexpected bills, pressure at work, sleepless nights. He wakes before Fajr. The house is silent, everyone else is asleep. He walks toward the sink. The worries are still there, nothing has been solved. The financial situation has not changed. The obligations remain, yet something strange happens. The moment the water touches his skin, he feels relief, not complete relief, but real relief, a softening, a spaciousness, a breath. Many people experience this. Few stop to ask why. Why water? Allah could have chosen countless symbols of purification. Fire removes impurities. Light reveals darkness. Wind clears dust. Yet the Quran repeatedly returns to water. Allah says He sends blessed water from the sky. He revives dead earth with water. He creates living things from water. Water appears again and again as a symbol of mercy, life, and renewal. Ibn Arabi pays close attention to these patterns. Throughout the Futuhat, he often links divine mercy with life-giving realities. And among all physical symbols, water becomes one of the clearest expressions of that mercy. Think about what water does. Water does not force. It does not dominate. It does not attack. It nourishes. It softens. It restores. It makes life possible. And this reveals something profound about purification. Most people secretly think purification is a form of punishment, a correction, a response to failure. But Allah chose a symbol that communicates something entirely different. Mercy, renewal, return. Imagine dry earth after months without rain. From a distance it appears lifeless. Nothing seems capable of growing there. Then rain falls, and suddenly life emerges. Grass appears. Color returns, movement returns. The earth was not given a new nature. Its original capacity was reawakened. This is exactly how Ibn Arabi wants us to understand spiritual renewal. The goal is not becoming someone else. The goal is returning to what Allah originally created within you. The fitra, the receptive heart, the capacity to recognize truth. The ability to stand before Allah without layers of accumulated distortion. And this changes the emotional tone of wudu completely. You stop seeing it as preparation for prayer. You begin seeing it as mercy before prayer. Allah knows how quickly the world gathers upon the heart. Allah knows how quickly distractions accumulate. Allah knows how quickly attachments form. And because He knows this, He gives you repeated opportunities to begin again. Not once a year, not once a month, not after a crisis, every day, again and again. Notice something else about water. Water always seeks lower ground. It descends. It does not elevate itself. It does not announce itself. It serves. Many spiritual teachers after Ibn Arabi pointed to this quality as a lesson in humility. The heart receives divine realities most clearly when it abandons self-importance. Just as water flows downward, mercy often enters where pride leaves. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you approached wudu as an act of receiving mercy rather than fulfilling a requirement? When was the last time you felt gratitude while washing? When was the last time you thought, Allah is giving me another chance to begin? Because that is what this ritual quietly announces 5 times every day. You are not trapped by what accumulated yesterday. You are not imprisoned by what distracted you this morning. You are not defined by what covered your heart an hour ago. You can return. You can begin again. You can become receptive again. Wudu does not create purity. It uncovers it. Most people believe they understand the relationship between wudu and prayer. The formula seems obvious. First comes wudu, then comes prayer. Wudu prepares you for salah. Simple, straightforward, correct. But Ibn Arabi asks us to look again. Because what if the relationship moves in both directions? What if prayer also prepares you for wudu? At first that sounds strange, but stay with me. The closer a person grows to Allah, the more sensitive they become to what distracts them from Allah. The clearer the mirror becomes, the more visible even small imperfections become. The beginner often notices only major sins. The mature servant notices subtle attachments. The beginner thinks purification becomes less necessary as spirituality increases. The realized servant discovers the opposite. Purification becomes more necessary because awareness increases. This is one of the great paradoxes running through Ibn Arabi's work, especially his discussions of tajalli, divine self-disclosure. In the Futuhat, Ibn Arabi repeatedly emphasizes that Allah's self-disclosure is continuous. Creation is renewed moment by moment. Existence itself is being continually refreshed. Nothing remains static. Everything is being recreated. What does that mean for purification? It means purification cannot be a one-time achievement, because existence itself is not static. You are changing. The world is changing. Your heart is receiving new impressions every moment. Renewal must therefore remain continuous. This completely reframes spiritual growth. The goal is not arriving at permanent purity. The goal is becoming a person who continually returns. A person who notices quickly, repents quickly, realigns quickly, returns quickly. Most people imagine the spiritual path as climbing a mountain. Ibn Arabi often presents it more like standing beneath an endless rain of divine generosity. The challenge is not creating the rain, the challenge is remaining receptive to it. And suddenly the repetition of wudu makes perfect sense. The repetition is not evidence of failure, the repetition is evidence of mercy. Allah knows you will need renewal tomorrow. Allah knows you will need renewal this afternoon. Allah knows you will need renewal after the next disappointment, the next distraction, the next anxiety, the next attachment. The greatest secret of wudu is not cleanliness, it is dependence. The saints do not outgrow purification, they outgrow the illusion that they no longer need it. At this point, you might be thinking, this sounds beautiful, but what do I actually do the next time I stand at the sink? How do I stop treating wudu as a routine and start experiencing it as renewal? Let me give you 3 practices, not theories, not ideals, practices you can begin today. The first is called the impression audit. Before you turn on the water, pause for 5 seconds. Ask yourself, what occupied my heart most today? Not what occupied your schedule, your heart. Was it a conversation, a fear, an ambition, a disappointment, a comparison? Choose one, only one. Then consciously name it before Allah. You are not trying to solve it, you are making it visible. Because what remains unseen usually remains influential. Remember Ahmad from earlier. The comparison did not hurt him because it existed. It hurt him because he carried it unconsciously. The impression audit interrupts that process. The second practice is called the face question. When water reaches your face, ask, what image of myself am I protecting? Do not rush to answer. Do not analyze. Just sit inside the question. Because sometimes the answer arrives immediately. Sometimes it arrives 3 days later. You may discover that you are exhausting yourself defending an identity Allah never asked you to create. The successful one, the admired one, the knowledgeable one, the spiritual one. The face question weakens the grip of performance, and when performance weakens, sincerity becomes possible. The third practice is called the open hand exercise. When washing your hands, physically open your palms, then identify one attachment, one outcome, one thing you keep trying to control, a business result, a relationship, a future plan, a fear. Name it. Then imagine releasing ownership of the outcome while keeping responsibility for the effort. This distinction matters. Islam does not teach passivity, it teaches trust. You continue acting. You simply stop pretending you control results. And that changes the emotional experience of life. Notice how each practice connects directly to one of Ibn Arabi's insights. The first clears impressions, the second loosens self-image, the third reveals attachments. Suddenly wudu becomes more than preparation. It becomes diagnosis, it becomes treatment. It becomes a repeated return to spiritual honesty. Purification begins the moment honesty begins. Let's return to the person we began with, the one who walked away from prayer, still feeling heavy. The one who thought the problem was weak faith, weak discipline, weak concentration. Now you can see something deeper. Maybe the problem was not that prayer failed. Maybe the problem was that you carried too much into it. The comparison, the performance, the attachment, the mental noise, the emotional residue, the invisible accumulation of an entire day. Ibn Arabi spent his life studying how divine realities become visible within human experience. And one of the most beautiful insights he offers is this: the heart was created to receive, but before it can receive clearly, it must become available. That is what wudu is doing, not merely washing skin, creating availability, creating receptivity, creating space. Every time water touches your face, Allah is reminding you that you are more than the image you defend. Every time water touches your hands, He is reminding you that you are more than the outcomes you chase. Every time you make wudu, He is reminding you that the heart can return. Again and again and again. This is why Allah made it repetitive. Because the world is repetitive. Distraction is repetitive. Anxiety is repetitive. Attachment is repetitive. So mercy is repetitive too. And perhaps that is the hidden secret in Arabi found inside wudu. Not a ritual of cleanliness, a ritual of return. Not a reminder of failure, a reminder of mercy. Not proof that you became dirty, proof that Allah wants you close. Every wudu is Allah's invitation to become receptive again. And before you leave, I want you to sit with one question. Think about the last prayer where your heart felt distant, distracted, or heavy. What were you carrying into that prayer that you never thought to wash away? Write it in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. Because the burden you can finally name may be the burden Allah is inviting you to release.